you're in the news again, aren't you? Because if you haven't heard, we've learned over the course of the last hour that the US military have dropped a bomb on a cave system, an ISIS cave system in Afghanistan. The bomb is described as the mother of all bombs. I guess Donald would use the word huge, probably. It weighs 21,000 pounds. It is the largest explosive device in terms of weight ever to have been dropped. Of course, in terms of force, there were the two nuclear bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So it's a 21,000 pound bomb that's been dropped on this cave complex. I'm guessing that it's some kind of bunker buster bomb, one of those bombs that, burrows into the ground before it explodes. Amazing thought that at the end of World War II, Lancasters were flying bombs that weighed 12,000 pounds. How on earth they ever took off, I don't know. So Trump has just done this, and he is fighting ISIS. There will be a lot of Trump supporters, both on this side of the pond and the other, whose initial reaction to this will be, well, at least with this, he's doing what he said, because he never really ever held back on saying that ISIS were the enemy. And here's a little clip from Donald Trump on the campaign trail in Iowa.
ISIS is making a tremendous amount of money because they have certain oil caps, right? They have certain areas of oil that they took away. They have some in Syria, some in Iraq. I would bomb the out of them. I would just bomb those suckers. And that's right. I'd blow up the pipes. I'd blow up the I'd blow up every single inch. There would be nothing left. And you know what? You'll get Exxon to come in there in 2 months. You ever see these guys, how good they are, the great oil companies? They'll rebuild that sucker brand new. It'll be beautiful. And I'd ring it, and I'd take the oil.
Well, Exxon, of course, which at that moment in time was led by a man called Rex Tillerson, who happens just now to be the Secretary of State. Wait, won't be Rex Tillerson who's going in and doing it. So I don't think there's any particular confusion about how Trump felt about ISIS and what he was going to do if he became US president. I'm sorry that we had to bleep part of the speech. I'll leave it to your imagination as to what he might have said. In response to it, this is Sean Spicer, his press secretary, and this is the first official response to what happened.
Some news breaking out of Afghanistan, so I just want to give you a quick update. At around 7 p.m. local time in Afghanistan last night, the United States military used a GBU-43 weapon in Afghanistan. The GBU-43 is a large, powerful, and accurately delivered weapon. We targeted a system of tunnels and caves that ISIS fighters used to move around freely, making it easier for them to target U.S. military advisors and Afghan forces in the area. The United States takes the fight against ISIS very seriously, and in order to defeat the group, we must deny them operational space, which we did. The United States took all precautions necessary to prevent civilian casualties and collateral damage as a result of the operation. Any further details, I would refer you to the Department of Defense on that.
Well, having told you that we would tonight debate the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Lord Carey's very powerful piece in today's Daily Telegraph, where he condemns the British government for effectively discriminating against Christian refugees from Syria and says these people are facing a genocide, which I'd very much picked as an Easter story. I think the events of the last hour mean we really do need, at least between now and 7:30, to talk about this. And the question that I want to pose and get your response to, is this the way to beat ISIS? Is bombing the way to win wars? Is it right that he's fighting ISIS? I mean, nobody can disagree that he said he was going to fight them. He was absolutely clear about that all the way through. I guess the timing of this, just a few days after the attack on one of Assad's airfields, might surprise people, or perhaps not. Because perhaps what he saw in America, well, his own supporters are a bit confused about why he was attacking Assad, who is somebody who has been fighting ISIS. Maybe this is a way of saying to the American people, no, I'm clear who the real enemy is. But can you win wars by just dropping bombs? Now, the history of this would suggest to me that you probably can't. Bombs, artillery shells, if we think of the First World War. I mean, hundreds of millions of shells were thrown between different positions on the Western Front and the other fronts in that war. And whilst it caused, well, 60% of the casualties in the British Army were caused, in fact, by shrapnel, artillery shells in some way. On its own, it doesn't win. We bombed Germany flat. Was it that won us the war? Or, ironically, did it in some parts of Germany maybe even harden resolve to carry on the fight all the way, right to the last denouement outside the bunker? I guess the one argument you could put is that 2 nuclear bombs did lead to a Japanese surrender, but they also knew that following those bombs were going to be hundreds of thousands of battle-trained American troops landing on the shore. And in Vietnam, and I know Americans hate to be reminded of Vietnam, but the carpet bombing by the B-52s actually lowered the surface of the ground by 6 feet over vast areas, and yet the Viet Cong were down in their tunnels, and it certainly didn't win them the war in Vietnam. I think there is a way that ISIS can be taken on, but I don't think it's just bombing alone. And I wonder, do you think that Trump perhaps, given 2 different attacks within the space of a week, is he beginning to look a bit like a warmonger? Interesting. Zach in Greenwich, is he doing the right thing here?
Nigel, I commend you for taking this line and not being ridiculous. And I'm sure there's going to be people coming on, oh, yeah, it's okay. The thing is, the problem I have, Nigel, is that when ISIS, for example, and again, I don't condone their behaviour either, but...
Good.
When of course, when ISIS come and turn around, let's say, Mr. Trump, he done this big bomb. I wonder how many women and children died in that bomb. The thing is, if ISIS now come and turn, well, look, they killed our women and children, let's come around and go and kill their women and children. Well, it's tit for tat, isn't it? You can't say if you have to condemn both sides, and whoever condones one side, therefore they have to condone the other side as well. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, to a large extent, the big bombing build-up that happened in this country under Churchill as Prime Minister was seen as revenge for Coventry. In Coventry, this raid had happened. About, I think, 600 people were actually killed in the raid, 1,500 wounded in the raid, and the feeling was, as Bomber Command was built under Harris, that this was us hitting back, and that was the right thing to do. And, I'm not sure quite how many hundreds of thousands of women and children died in that, but something like 600,000 Germans were killed. So, war, Zach, does bring out tit-for-tat behaviour, and I'm not condoning it at all. But I just wonder, we've spent a lot of years in Afghanistan, haven't we? The Americans, the British, a lot of blood and treasure, which effectively got us nowhere. And now we're dropping bombs on a cave system. I mean, on its own, Zach, I can't see it working.
What annoys me the most is we've got all these problems in this country, okay? All these problems. And bombs they're not cheap, man. Do you know what I mean? Like, they are not cheap. If bombers, fighter jets, the fuel for them, the tanks, the human life, it's not cheap.
No.
And the fact that we've got food banks and all the rest of it in this country, and people can't, NHS waiting lists are, to the sky, and maybe not this country, but for example, Trump, and they got the similar problems in America, which was the reason why he came into power.
Well, America first, of course, was his biggest pitch of all, Zach, wasn't it? That we're going to put the interests of American people and American businesses first. Yeah, no, I get that.
Right. And they're spending all this money on this £21,000 bomb. It's crazy. It doesn't make sense to me.
Zach, thank you. Zach says it's crazy and it's not going to work and it will kill innocent women and children. It was noticeable that Sean Spicer said they'd done their best to avoid collateral damage to people who were not ISIS, but it's very difficult, isn't it, in any war situation to guarantee anything like that. Simon in Hornchurch, is he right to have done this? And can we beat ISIS by dropping bombs?
All right, Mr. Farage. Well, you've alluded to the point that I was just making to your researcher on the phone, which is that, we went in years ago, ourselves and the Americans. The Americans, quite rightly, in my opinion, were taking revenge for 9/11. That was fair enough.
Yes.
We then got all the propaganda about nation building. The British have lost hundreds of soldiers there, the Americans even more. I assume this bomb was dropped because there's a threat to American troops. that are still there. They've had to re-escalate their involvement there. After all these years, it hasn't changed anything. Then, of course, he's now changed his America First policy, where he's now interfering in Syrian internal affairs. The short answer is no, I don't agree with it. I don't see where it's getting even the United States or as an extension the United Kingdom. I don't see how it protects us here in our homeland, and just destabilising other countries. And as your previous caller sort of alluded to, upsetting the locals and just generating further hostility. You know, instead of upholding the government of Afghanistan, which clearly isn't popular, whichever alternative it is, we should pull out. They should pull out their American troops in there and let Afghanistan get on with it, and worry about protecting their own country, the United States.
Simon, thank you. Both Zach and Simon firmly of the view that it's the wrong thing to do. All it will do is further antagonise people against America and, almost by definition, the United Kingdom as well. Let me know your view. Is this the right thing to have done? Can we beat ISIS by dropping bombs, albeit very, very big ones? Get involved in this, please. Call me on 0345 6060 973. Text me at 84850. You can tweet me on @LBC, not forgetting the hashtag Farage and LBC, and you can watch the show live on LBC's Facebook page right now. Daniel in Holland Park, was this the right thing to do?
No, it certainly wasn't. And I just want to say that I just feel like this whole thing, everything is just based on white supremacy.
White supremacy?
Yeah, it's something we don't talk about, but it's something I think we need to talk about. It's definitely a topic, and I know everyone shies away from it, but, what have the Afghanistanis, what have they done? What has the Middle East done? This is all about white power, because it seems like, because literally, if you look at the world's history and you go back in time, it's always the white supremacy making the first move.
Daniel, Daniel, America is a country with a very big black population, isn't it?
But can I just say something though? Yeah, but those black population, where do they come from?
Well, they come from all over the world, as indeed do the white population in America.
We was taken and captured, shackled, and brought over to America as slaves. That's how we first was there. That's bottom line.
Well, and Daniel, there could be people that argue that the Irish population in America are there because the Brits treated them badly and all the rest of it. I don't know that helps. So are you seriously telling me, Daniel, that you think what Trump has done today is an act of a white supremacist?
Oh, definitely. He is one.
Okay, Daniel. No, I don't at all. But Daniel, I take your point. I hear what you have to say. Thank you. Is dropping big bombs the way to beat ISIS? I don't think so. In a moment, I'm going to tell you how I think we should contemplate taking on ISIS. But right now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:15.
Weeknights on LBC start with Nigel Farage from 7.
Now, we've learned that the Americans have dropped the largest non-nuclear weapon in existence, and I think probably the largest bomb in terms of weight that has ever been dropped. 21,500 pounds is what it weighed. It's been dropped on a cave system in Afghanistan, held, as intelligence tells them, by ISIS. And I'm asking you to tweet and text and call to answer the question I'm trying to pose to you. Is this the way to beat ISIS? Can you beat ISIS by dropping bombs? Well, my view on this, and I've thought about this a lot over the course of the last few years, because I do believe that what ISIS represent is the biggest threat to the West and the biggest threat to our way of life. But right at the moment, they may have an ideology that's strong, but militarily they are not particularly strong. They don't have, for example, fighter jets at this moment in time, thank goodness. I'm absolutely certain that you can't beat ISIS by just dropping bombs. I'm absolutely certain you can't beat ISIS by fighting them in any one country. You have to have simultaneous action. It has to be happening at the same time in Yemen and in Nigeria and in Syria and everywhere where militarily they've got AK-47s and force of any kind. What we need to do, if we're serious about this, we'll have to build the biggest grand alliance in history. We will have to get a couple of dozen plus countries working simultaneously together to militarily weaken ISIS as much as we possibly can. And whilst we're doing that, we have to understand that we need boots on the ground to win any conflict like this and ultimately to win over the confidence of the civilian populations. And that means, whilst we're beating them militarily, we must not feed the ideology, which means there must not be American or British boots on the ground, because all that does is drive thousands, perhaps tens of thousands more people towards this ideology. We have to work with all of those governments across the region. We have to work with their armies. Yes, of course, we can provide intelligence. Yes, of course, we can provide kit. There's an awful lot of things we can do to help. But you can't win wars simply by bombing. You need boots on the ground, but they mustn't be ours, because otherwise the ideology will continue. And even when you've done all of those things, there is absolutely no total guarantee of success. But at least that would represent some kind of strategy. That's how I feel about this, and I've been feeling this way increasingly over the last few years. I'm going to go to Russell in Guildford. Russell, tell me, has Trump done the right thing?
No, I don't believe he has. Nigel, I think that we've been over in the Middle East for as long as my eldest son has been alive. He's now 16 years old.
Yep.
And what I like to say is that, and it sounds like a throwaway comment, but we hear all the time, and I'm a brand developer, the idea of winning hearts and minds. Now, one of the problems is that when you actually go and bomb someone, when you send forces in, troops on the ground, what you're not doing is you're not addressing their thoughts, their beliefs, their ideals.
Sure.
And you cannot bomb. You cannot shoot. Those thoughts and ideas, they are not tangible things. They belong and they reside in the heads of these people. Now, we've had long enough to actually be in these regions and actually win the hearts and minds of a developing generation, the adolescents there now. But the sad thing is, these are the people who are now taking up arms and being radicalized and actually joining the fight against what we in the West are doing. We've had an opportunity to educate and actually talk with young Muslims growing up in that region to actually not to actually manipulate, but to actually get them to see there's another way.
Russell, I do understand that, Russell. I do understand that, but we do have to face the fact that as it is right now, ISIS do have fighting-equipped units. We have to do something about that, surely.
We do, and I agree that we have to do something. However, it's not going to help our cause in terms of actually going in and actually building that because as we've seen throughout history, the changes finally come when discussion takes place and when talks take place, and just bombing in this way, it is not identifying the key people that we can be talking to.
No, and Russell, the point you make, this has been going on as long as your 16-year-old has been alive in Afghanistan, is a very strong and powerful point, and I thank you very much indeed for making it. Matthew from Costa Rica, has Trump done the right thing?
No, he hasn't, Nigel. Lovely to speak to you again. Right, now, here's the thing, Nigel. I've been a fan of yours since anybody really knew who you were.
Yeah.
And it's been a delight to see your rise to fame. But there's a but coming.
I can tell. Go
right.
on.
And the thing is, a lot of people think that, you and perhaps Katie Hopkins are the Donald Trumps of the UK, but you're not. You have always said over the last decade, we need to have less of invading other countries and trying to topple foreign dictators.
Yep.
Do not poke the Russian bear.
Yep.
And now this is actually happening. This is the time, and I really just want to plead with you to stick to your principles and speak out against what Donald Trump is doing.
Well, Matthew,
yes, he's your friend.
Matthew, I really, I really couldn't have been much clearer last week in the way that I felt about what had happened in Syria. Even last night on the show at 7:30, I was using some of the views of Scott Ritter, the former UN weapons inspector, the man who told us, by the way, that Saddam did not have WMD, and yet we ignored him. And he was telling us that he felt that the likelihood was actually that a bomb had been dropped on an ISIS dump that held chemical weapons. So I think if you look at what I've been saying, Matthew, over the course of the last week, I've been really very, very worried indeed. It is harder for me to condemn today's bomb, because he did actually make it pretty clear in that speech in Iowa, which we'll play again in a minute, what he was going to do. But Matthew, equally, one second, equally, Matthew, I've also just said in the last few minutes that you can't beat ISIS by just dropping bombs. So I think I'm being pretty clear.
That's fair enough. But just in reference to, the previous attack against Assad, I do feel that you could have been more direct in your condemnation. Maybe take a leaf out of Katie Price's book, Katie Hopkins' book, and say, she woke up that morning and said, "Where is my president?" And perhaps you could have done the same. This is not right. My biological lie detector says that Assad did not drop those chemical bombs, and I think you, in your heart of hearts, that's not true as well.
Matthew, I've been making these arguments over the course of the last week. I've been pretty clear about it. And, Katie Price, if you're listening, we'll be keen to have your view too. Matthew, thank you. Ricky from Grove Park asks me, Nigel, can we beat ISIS without America and the UK? Well, I think I've laid that out, Ricky, that we can be very, very useful, but if it's just us going into other people's countries, whatever we do militarily, we probably will continue to foster the ideology. Hi, Nigel. Did Trump drop this bomb to show North Korea America's firepower? Terry in Milton Keynes. Terry, that's a very, very thoughtful point indeed. And I get one here. Nigel's appeasement attitude is surprising. I thought he was made of stronger stuff. You cannot fight fire without a good dose of water, says Manuela from Worcester. Well, I've never set myself up to be a warmonger and out for invading and bombing everybody. I'm going to ask Jack in Epping, is dropping a bomb, or perhaps a lot of very big bombs, going to be ISIS?
No, I don't think it is. Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
I don't think it is. I think that dropping a B-52 full of Agatha Christie novels would probably be more effective than a big bomb.
Why Agatha Christie, Jack? Tell me.
Well, it's actually a quote from Billy Connolly.
Oh, is it? Oh, there we are. I'm ignorant. Right, thank you.
But no, I commend you on your knowledge of military history that you briefed us with at the beginning of your show.
Yeah.
And I believe it's only recently that certain medals have been awarded to, the British airmen that, did the bombing campaigns in Germany and things like that. And I think it's only now that they have, been recognised.
Well, we rather turned our backs on Bomber Command. There was a feeling that Dresden was a raid too far. And there was a feeling that Churchill rather dropped them, actually, in May 1945. And it wasn't until a few years ago when a big Bomber Command memorial went up, privately funded, went up, and it's down just off Hyde Park. And anyone visiting London, it shows a big bronzes of a Lancaster crew. And it's well worth going to see. So, Jack, we did rather, even in 1945, even when we found out what had happened in Belsen, what had happened in Auschwitz and elsewhere, even then there was a feeling in this country, amongst some, that perhaps we'd gone too far. And, yeah, we killed an awful lot of people, and, yeah, we knocked out factories and railway lines, but, you can't... We would not have got a German surrender just by bombing. We had to have people actually there on the ground. And that, Jack, I think is the point with this. But listen, go on.
To do is that I think that, with a smart bomb or the largest, non-tactical nuclear weapon bomb or whatever it was, I think that is, it's only going to turn people against us, because it's the people on the ground, it's ISIS on the ground, or formerly in that region, probably the Taliban,
and saying to civilians that are being killed by bombs, look at what they're doing to us. Jack, I get it, I understand it. Crystal on Facebook messages says the mother of all bombs was dropped after Afghanistan was already destroyed. Where's the logic? Well, I guess the logic, Crystal, is that they were holed up in these caves. Ian says there is no talking with terrorists. Nobody can change their minds. Maybe that's about the first comment I've really had tonight, suggesting that this is the right thing to do. Most of you don't think it is. More of this in a moment. Was he right to drop this bomb? Can we beat ISIS by bombing? You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30 and time for the news with Rupert Bhatia.
The United States has...
Well, one thing Donald Trump does try to do, or has tried to do, in these first few months of his presidency, is to keep his promises, which is what shocked everybody so much about the intervention in Syria that took place last week. But there wasn't really much confusion about how Donald Trump felt about ISIS and what his actions as president might be. This is a clip from Iowa when he was out there on the campaign trail.
ISIS is making a tremendous amount of money because they have certain oil camps, right? They have certain areas of oil that they took away. They have some in Syria, some in Iraq. I would bomb the out of them. I would just bomb those suckers. And that's right. I'd blow up the pipes. I'd blow up the I'd blow up every single inch. There would be nothing left. And you know what? You'll get Exxon to come in there in 2 months. You ever see these guys, how good they are, the great oil companies? They'll rebuild that sucker brand new. It'll be beautiful. And I'd ring it, and I'd take the oil.
Well, there you go. He wasn't... Mind you, there isn't any oil in Afghanistan that I know of. In fact, I'm quite certain there isn't any. And Rex Tillerson, of course, is no longer boss of Exxon. He's now the Secretary of State. It was clear he wanted to do something about ISIS. So I can't criticise him, can I? Because this is what was in his manifesto. But the question I'm asking is a rather subtle one, is this the way to beat ISIS? And can you win a war against these people and against an ideology, let's not forget that, simply by dropping bombs? And it seems pretty clear to me that you can't. And I wonder whether some of you think that Trump now is in danger of looking like a warmonger. It's a question I'm asking you. Hi, Nigel. I wish I had the chance to write on the bomb. This is for Nice, the Bataclan, Westminster, San Bernardino, Bombay, Charlie Hebdo, 9/11, Germany, Sweden, 7/7. I could go on, says Kevin in Birmingham. Kevin, I absolutely get that. And listen, I've been saying for a long, long time, in fact, for many, many years, this is the greatest threat we face to our way of life. And I do want us to do something about it, but I don't believe bombs alone are enough. On Twitter, I get dropping a couple of massive bombs in the right places is a start. ISIS has declared war on the West, whether we like it or not, and that's from LHT in London. I was a Trump supporter, but the way he is going, this is just going to get worse, and I fear that this is rapidly spiralling into a third world war, says James. I wonder what Vladimir in Belfast thinks about tonight's events.
Hi, Nigel. Good evening.
Good evening. What do you think, Vladimir?
Is dropping the mother of all bombs the right way to beat ISIS? Yes, it is, and it's delivering a promise, I think. However, it's not enough. Where ISIS are operating in the Middle East, a full-scale ground force is needed. Air support is needed as well. Thousands are dying in the hands of ISIS, and this needs to stop now. I think more has to be done to prevent people joining ISIS, stop their online propaganda, and basically stop their communication within Europe, in the Middle East, and try to defeat them. I don't think the Western governments are doing enough at the minute, and I think they should go harder.
OK, so you've got no problem with what happened today, but you do think we need ground forces to win the war. And Vladimir, I agree with you. I don't think a war is winnable without ground forces, but I also reiterate the 2 points I made earlier. Firstly, you can't do this in one country. You have to do it in lots of countries simultaneously. But Vladimir, do you agree with me that when it comes to the boots on the ground, that they should not be American or British boots?
I don't agree with that completely. I think it should be joint force with local governments and also British and US forces, maybe NATO forces.
Well, interesting, isn't it, that one of the things that we've been talking about on and off on this show over the last few months is NATO and a redefinition of NATO's role. And taking on ISIS and taking on Islamic terrorism could, Vladimir, be a different focus, couldn't it, for NATO? And it might actually lead to...
Yes.
It might lead to this grand alliance that I talked about 20 minutes ago. Vladimir, thank you very much indeed for your point of view. I'm going to ask Liam in Croydon. Liam, what do you think about this bomb, and can we beat ISIS by bombing? Hello, Liam. Right, I can't get him, so I'll go to Kieran in Hampton. Kieran, is this bomb, is a campaign of bombing a way to beat ISIS?
Nigel, thanks for having me. We spoke twice before on a different topic. This is the third time. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it is, in a way, it is good. He is basically starting to act on what he has promised. Of course, I don't agree with what he has done on Syria last week, but certainly this is the right way. But what I want to talk to you about is you hit actually a nail on the head, which I have been talking to lots of my friends and business colleagues. This is what you talked about, the Grand Alliance. The time has come for UK, US, Russia. I am a British Asian. I want India to be involved. They have got a different skill set, especially with the Middle East intelligence and especially dealing with Pakistan in the past and still continuing and all. You need to get involved the countries which have suffered from terrorist atrocities, and also get involved the countries from the region. And this is where it has to happen. It happened in 1940 with Churchill and all, which ended up removing the tyranny and all.
Yes.
The time has come now. UK has to stand up and act as a global power. Last week, Mr. Johnson, Boris Johnson, whom you're talking about, he refused to go. Now it is time that he has to step in, especially once Brexit has delivered. We need to stand up for right causes.
Well, Kieran, I get your point, but the Foreign Secretary, Mr. Johnson, who was supposed to go to Moscow to meet the big bosses, cancelled his visit and instead tried, without meeting them face to face, to impose extra sanctions on Russia, only not to get international agreement. Kieran, you agree with my point about the attempt to form a grand alliance, and you're quite right to include India, who've suffered with Islamic terrorism, and I know through border disputes and everything else, they fear this as much as anybody. Kieran, thank you. Liam in Croydon, is your line working now?
Yeah, I accidentally muted my mic a minute ago.
Right, OK, so dropping bombs, is it the way to beat ISIS?
Well, it can help, but it's just not the way on its own.
No, so what would you do?
We need to send some troops in. Maybe some of the other EU, well, it's not EU anymore, but some of the other European countries can step in.
I don't see them doing that in a hurry. Do you really?
Well, they need to, because it's a big threat to everyone.
It is a big threat to everyone. But Liam, my worry is, and I'm, if this grand alliance was to be formed, and we were to provide intelligence and equipment and all sorts of things, that would be great. Fine, I'm with it. But I still repeat this point, that if it's British and American troops on the ground, we may be likely to actually alienate local populations by being seen as invaders, as opposed to working with training and arming the armies and militias in those countries.
Isn't that like how ISIS was formed? Didn't America arm them to fight Assad? And then...
Yes, that is very true, but we'd be working here with governments. Yeah, I mean, actually, America, particularly in Afghanistan, was arming the people who were taking on the Russians, and look what we finished up with. And yeah, I get that, Liam, but I'm talking here about governments working together. I'm talking about forces that are working for and with governments. And yeah, there are always risks of fragmentation. I mean, I'm not quite sure how many opposition groups there are in Syria, but perhaps it's dozens, so it is very, very difficult. None of this is straightforward, Liam. I just fear that us being seen to be invaders, we might beat them militarily, we might take out their guns and their weapons, but we might actually foster their ideology even further, Liam. That is my point.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%, yeah.
Yeah. OK, thank you very much indeed. On Facebook, Richard says, bomb their infrastructure to limit their ability to perform. Boots on the ground to mop up will end it. But can you really destroy an ideology? Well, Richard, this is the point I keep coming back to. Junaid says, I thought Donald was going to be different. I was in favour of him compared to Mrs. Clinton, but he's proven to be another puppet. Paul Bates says, my dad flew in Lancasters and was the guy who pressed the button to drop the bombs, but he would never talk about it. And there were many, Paul, in that generation who never talked about it. Right now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:45.
Coming up.
As the mother of all bombs is dropped on ISIS tunnels in Afghanistan, a £21,500 bomb, we're asking, is this the way to beat ISIS? Can we win this war by dropping bombs alone? And we haven't talked at all tonight about ISIS within our own countries. And bombing will not solve the issue of homegrown ISIS. The first step is to control our borders, and that comes from Ollie in Basingstoke. And Ollie, today is a day when the German prosecutors have issued a warrant for a 26-year-old man, Abdul Besset, who arrived in Germany via Turkey early in 2016 and is an active ISIS member who was an accomplice to the bus attack that took place, that horrendous attack before Christmas. So you're quite right, Ollie in Basingstoke. We mustn't forget that we do have a problem within our own countries, one that I think Mrs. Merkel made very much worse, and this arrest warrant issued by the German police today will not be the last. But to return to this question of taking on ISIS in the Middle East and Afghanistan and elsewhere, I'm going to ask Naveed in Lewisham, and I believe you're from Afghanistan, is that right?
Yes, thank you for having me on your show, Mr. Nigel Farage.
Not at all.
Yes, I am from Afghanistan, and basically I disagree with having boots on the ground or bombing in Afghanistan. It's not going to help anything at all. 14 years having British and NATO forces in Afghanistan, it did not help anything. I recently come back from Afghanistan. The places where British and American soldiers, they occupied, like Kandahar and Helmand, as soon as they left, the Taliban are back in there and they're just controlling the area. So it's nothing going to help, because after the Russia left, we had Mujahideen, and then after the Mujahideen, we had Taliban. Now ISIS, God knows how many more is going to come and invade Afghanistan.
I mean, are you saying that there's nothing that's ever going to work in Afghanistan?
Well, based on the experiences of Genghis Khan, and then we had the British, and then again, so it's a country where, if somebody is fighting for their life and they don't care if they lose their life, they want to lose their life. It's like the ISIS, they're cowards, and, they want to lose their life based on, misinterpreting the Islam or religious, just to gain power. And then, if they want to do that, somebody from the West who's getting paid, who got family going there for the, to get the money, and somebody's fighting for their life and somebody's fighting for the money, who's going to win? Obviously, the one who's going to lose their life.
Well, certainly, Naveed, historically, Afghanistan is unwinnable for absolutely everybody. And, the Soviet Union was pretty strong in 1980 and failed. And the British in the 19th century were at the height of their powers. And was it, I think, 17,000 British people retreated from Kabul, and they were butchered. There was one survivor out of 17,000 people on that retreat from Kabul. So, winning in Afghanistan is difficult. But, Naveed, we can't simply stand by and let this ideology grow and militarise across the rest of the world, surely.
Of course not. Of course not. Mr. Nigel Farage, see, the thing is, I was against lots of your ideas coming out of Europe and all that. But now I actually understand lots of the issues caused in Middle East and elsewhere. Is actually I'm starting liking you more and more. So what's happening is in Afghanistan, I think never war and arms and boots on the ground never going to win. Only the way to win in Afghanistan is to educate people, and that's the thing. And poverty and education. That's these two things can only win in Afghanistan and Middle East. Apart from that, I don't think anything will help.
Naveed, thank you, and that sort of further backs up my thought that British and American troops going into these countries look like invaders. On Facebook, Paul says, I suppose they managed to hit the right target. I jolly well hope so, Paul. Billy says, much as I hate wars, I would drop more bombs, preferably of the nuclear kind. Thank you, Billy. Frankie says, ISIS wouldn't exist if the UK-US didn't invade Iraq. Well, Frankie, I have to say, I have said this before, that I think our actions open the door to something even worse than Al-Qaeda and the things that went before it. I'm going to ask Andrew in Docklands. Andrew, tell me, can we beat ISIS by bombing? Is the idea of a grand alliance perhaps the way to go?
No, absolutely we can't. And I listen to people like Congressman Ron Paul, and his son is a senator now, isn't he, Rand Paul?
Yes.
And he's been the wisest voice. Ron Paul has been the wisest voice through all of this conflict. You can't do anything, by bombing people. You just create more of the same problems. And of course, I feel actually very, very sorry for the people in the Middle East. We're on our fifth country that the West has destroyed out there. We've suffered the migrant flows. Of course, there's big corporations have made a lot of money. War is a great business. And I just think that, if you look at Vietnam, they bombed, goodness knows how many bombs they dropped down there. And, and it was like ants just regrouping around, once you throw a stone at their nest, it just bounced off them. And Afghanistan, all those places are so resilient. We have to cut ISIS off, firstly, by stop interfering in those countries. Let those people fight for what they believe in, and let them get the kind of government they deserve, just as we are now, creating this revolution here. We're fighting to get the kind of
and we must stop the money too, Andrew, mustn't we? We must stop the money. I mean, I've played that Trump clip, and Trump was talking about oil and money. We must try and stop that too. Andrew, thank you. I must move on. I've got others that want to call. Hamid in Wembley, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Thank you for having me on your show.
Not at all.
I am from Afghanistan myself, and I would like to say that ISIS stands for an Islamic State of Iraq and Sham, which is Syria.
Yes.
It has no grounds in Afghanistan. The people of Afghanistan have rejected ISIS and their ideology. Afghans are not Wahhabis. We have rejected them long time ago. I would like to point out that this is the rebranding of Taliban, and it's been done by Pakistan because you answer part of the question yourself. You said that Afghanistan is a poor country. We don't have any oil. So ISIS cannot sustain itself unless they get help from their neighboring countries, which they are getting from Pakistan. Pakistan is supporting them. And let me remind you that Ayman al-Zawahiri is in Pakistan, Al-Qaeda's current leader. Osama bin Laden was found in Pakistan, and every other terrorist in the region is sheltered in Pakistan because Pakistan used terrorism as a foreign policy to achieve its objectives, especially in Afghanistan. And yes, once again, ISIS is not in Afghanistan. They come and go. They come and attack, and then they go. So if you're bombing Afghanistan, you're going to have a lot of people revolting against the American presence, against the American and British troops. Afghans are pro-democracy, and we have proved that in the last election. Even 90-year-old women went to cast their votes. We are pro-democracy. We have rejected the Wahhabi ideology.
Well, that's
a lot of
the fact that you're rejecting ISIS wholesale is good news. Thank you, Hamid. And I've got some up-to-date news. This is President Trump a few minutes ago.
Another successful job. We're very, very proud of our military. Just like we're proud of the folks in this room, we are so proud of our military, and it was another successful event.
Did you authorize it, sir?
Everybody knows exactly what happened. And what I do is I authorize my military. We have the greatest military in the world, and they've done a job as usual. So we have given them total authorization, and that's what they're doing. And frankly, that's why they've been so successful lately. If you look at what's happened over the last 8 weeks and compare really to what's happened over the last 8 years, you'll see there's a tremendous difference. So we have incredible leaders in the military, and we have incredible military, and we are very proud of them. And this was another very, very successful mission.
That was President Trump, and I've got a tweet in from William R. Buckley, a very well-known American current affairs commentator. Nigel, listen to me. Trump knows what he's doing. He always starts by hitting first and makes friends later. He is hitting first. Interesting. William, I haven't criticised him for what he's done today. What I have said is a more nuanced response that you can't win, you can't beat ISIS just by fighting them on your own. You have to fight them across a whole range of countries. You have to win the war on the ground, not just in the air. And there is an argument that we could do with a real attempt to form a grand alliance of all the countries that want to share our values and defeat this awful, terrible, cancerous new form of terrorism. Well, it's the Easter break coming up, and today is the day of the Last Supper, and I thought that former Archbishop Carey this morning, I thought what he said in his article in the Daily Telegraph was fascinating. Now, I say this because I, in 2013, was the first party leader in the United Kingdom to say that I thought we should take some Syrian refugees into our country, and I particularly thought we should take some Christian Syrian refugees into our country. I said it because that if you look at the 1951 Geneva Convention, the definition of a refugee is somebody who, because of their race or religion, fears persecution or worse. I was condemned by Mr Juncker and told that religion had nothing to do with it. The British government, frankly, were no better. They say everyone must be treated equally. And it's very interesting what the Archbishop says. He says, effectively, only 1% of those that have come as refugees, that's 51 of them, to this country, are Christian, that effectively we are discriminating against them. And he says that within the UK, there is a phobia about any perceived anti-Islamic bias. And because of that, we're rewriting the rules of history. We're throwing the Geneva Convention out of the window. And he does use the word genocide. He says the Christians are undergoing genocide. So I want to wish you all a happy Easter, but share a thought for the Christians in Iraq and Syria. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show on LBC. I'm back on Tuesday evening from 7. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins. But up next, it's Clive Bull.
Thank you, Nigel. So, yes, we'll continue this conversation. The US has dropped its largest ever non-nuclear bomb on Afghanistan.